I am going to commit various war crimes. So I want to take this stupid idiot machine that constantly breaks, open it up and then slap it into a 19-inch rack format. I also want to add the Yamaha E70 organ that Mark donated to me as a reward for my work on his synthesizers. And that's the Tower of Power I keep referring to in my previous videos. So let's start with the Elka Solist. Wonderful little synthesizer, and I'm very eager to put it in rack format. Unfortunately, I forgot to film most of the construction process, so I'm just going to show the end result and talk you through everything that I kept original, everything that I added to it, and, well, the wonderful sounds it makes now. Right, let's take a look at all the parts, how I modified the Elka Solist for each part and what it does. And yes, it's standing on top of the Tower of Power, the E70 organ turned rack format, but more on that in the next video. So first of all, we have the VCO module. This consists of two PCBs internally plus an Arduino Uno. And here you can see set Arduino Uno in the back here. There's the USB port for programming. And there's also a little port here for the wall adapter in case I need it. There's also two MIDI ports, in and out. The idea is that I can send MIDI in here and it will be duplicated to the MIDI through port to other things. There's also a switch here, because the MIDI in of course uses the serial input of the Arduino, and the USB programmer also uses the serial. For programming the Arduino, I need to have a little switch that basically just disconnects the MIDI signal whenever I upload a new sketch to the Arduino. Now the Arduino is responsible for two things. First of all, of course, converting the MIDI to control signals to the note and octave select board of the Elka Solist. But the Arduino also does a second thing. It takes the 8-foot square wave signal from the main VCO. It detects if a C note is being played, and then it will indicate with these LEDs over here if that C note is actually in tune. So it also acts as a tuner. And with this knob you can then adjust the tuning of the VCO to get it exactly locked with this little lock to the side here in place for perfect tuning. Because that was something that was always missing in the Elka Solist, is a proper tuning knob. Now speaking of detuning, this module has two other functions. Octave down. This is exactly the same as the original Elka Solist, just a switch. And then there's the bend, which I now combined the original switch and the knob that was on the Solist to a single potentiometer with a built-in switch, like so. And with little LED to indicate. That goes for both these switches. Next up is the waveforms. So, as you may know, the Elka Solist has a whole bunch of presets which are not present on any of this, because I wanted to have control of everything. And I've done things a little bit differently. Now the Elka Solist generates several footages. 4 of them, 16-foot, 8-foot, 4-foot and 2-foot. And from those footages of square waves, it kind of combines them, processes them, and does all sorts of things to generate different waveforms. To keep things a little bit more minimal and comprehensive, I've used some dual switches. So these have a center position in which nothing is activated, and then you have up and down. And I use that for 16 and 8 foot, for both square wave as a sawtooth, 16 foot, and then pulse and sawtooth 8 foot. And these are the original waveforms generated by the Solist. I didn't really change anything. There is a combined series of square waves that I've just called 4 foot combined. That's a normal switch. And then there, of course, there's PWM. Now for the PWM, I added several controls. I've used the original LFO of the Solist purely for the PWM. I've built a separate LFO to do all the other modulations. I'll get to that later. So I've added a rate control going from 1 Hz all the way to 4 Hz, which is pretty much the original range. A def knob which mixes between the LFO and this offset slider, and this offset is basically a manual PWM. Next up is the filter. Now I didn't really change much, I more like added things to the filter. The original Solist filter always had a low pass and a band pass mode, which you can see a switch for. So I basically just replaced the presets switching this with an actual manual switch. Next to that is the band pass width switch, which has 3 modes: narrow, normal, and wide. And basically all this does, this sets an offset to the cutoff of the high pass filter, because you gotta realize a band pass filter is a low pass and a high pass filter combined. So by offsetting one of the filters, you get a much narrower or wider range of frequencies that are let through. Now, of course, for the filter controls, there is cutoff and resonance, very bog standard. Then I've added a little feature which takes the 16-foot square wave from the VCO and divides it down by 32 foot and 64 foot. And you have this switch here, which allows you to select between these footages. I also added a little integrator, so you can have square wave and triangle wave, and a depth slider. And what this does, it adds frequency modulation to the filter's cutoff. So when I raise this slider, I now basically have the VCO modulating the cutoff of the filter, and it gives very gnarly effects. Then there's the VCA. Again, just like the filter, I kept things pretty standard. I just exposed controls and added a VCO modulation to it. Now, for the VCA modulation, I've chosen for 16 and 32 foot, and the waveforms are the same. And I added, besides the depth slider, a sync slider. Now, what I've done is the square waves that normally would directly go to the VCA first go through a CD4046 PLL. And what I've done is this variable resistor, this slider, basically controls the rate at which the 4046 syncs to the frequency it's input. So when I raise this up and start playing notes, it kind of starts doing a portamento effect on the modulation. So you get these little like attacks on the modulation of the VCA, which is a really cool effect. And the last 2 sections are for all the modulations. Of course, there is a custom LFO and a custom envelope as well, because I didn't really want to reuse the original ones. As I said, I'm already using the original LFO for the PWM. I wish to have my modulations separate, because I like to have my range on the LFO absolutely massive. I want to have it really slow, but also audio rates. And well, this LFO excels in it. This is probably the most important addition to this synthesizer. The controls are pretty straightforward. You have rate going all the way from around 0.1 Hz all the way to 600 Hz. Then you have a shape control, which basically skews the waveform, and then a switch to select between two waveforms, square and triangle. But because of the skew knob, you can turn your triangle into a sawtooth and your square into a pulse. And this gives you a really wide range of modulation. There's also two LEDs that blink in sync with the rate of the LFO to give you a visual indication. And then there's 3 sliders to choose your modulation. So you have a VCO depth, a VCF depth, and a VCA depth. So you can modulate all these. Now the LFO has one extra feature which I couldn't fit on this panel because I forgot about it. So I added it to the VCA because I had 2 spare holes here. This is the vibrato delay switch. Basically when it's off, there's pretty much no delay on the vibrato, aka the VCO modulation. When it's on high, it takes about a second or 2 to get to the full modulation range of the LFO. Again, another layer of controllability, which was also original to the Elka Solist. Now the envelope is pretty simple. It's an attack decay or an attack release envelope. This is the same as the original envelopes that were in the Solist, but of course the original envelopes were all preset envelopes. The only user controllable envelope for the variations was only attack and release. So I couldn't really reuse that without having a whole bunch of switches and controls that, just didn't feel right. Also, the time range of the original envelopes was not great. I wanted something that could go from snappy to about, let's say 5 seconds. One feature that the original envelopes had of the Solist is being able to re-trigger. Now there's a little transistor in parallel with the main charging capacitor of the envelopes, which gets a pulse every time a new note is played. And this pulse is already generated by the Elka Solist itself. So I didn't really need to do anything except add that parallel transistor. Now this switch turns the re-trigger on and off. It basically disconnects the transistor if you have it off. And this gives you another layer of quite big flexibility in your sounds. You can switch both the VCA as the VCF between decay and release, because this envelope generator basically has 2 envelope generators that just have the same controls controlling them. There's one envelope for the VCF and one for the VCA. That's why you can switch them separately. And then I've also added an offset switch for the charge and discharge rate of the VCF envelope, which allows for more variation in the sound again. The other controls are simple. You just have your attack and decay release rate sliders. And for the VCF, I added a depth slider. Of course, the VCA is always fully modulated by the envelope. Otherwise, you'll get continuously playing notes and all sorts of weird shenanigans. So that was unnecessary. However, you may not always want to modulate the VCF with the envelope. So I added that slider. And that's basically all she wrote. Sounds awesome, as you heard in my short little teaser of my 9 Inch Nails reptile cover, of which a full video is coming, making extensive use of this green screen that I have and my beautiful lights, as well as good old game engine.